Hello and welcome to Marketing Global Edition with me, Jasmine Montgomery. And today, instead of Piers Geiler, we are chatting to a friend and previous client, Dominic Graham from Deloitte. And Dominic, welcome to the show. So delighted to have you on. Dominic has, I think, the longest title in the universe. He is Business Development Assistant Director for Private Equity and Financial Investors in Strategy, Risk and Transactions Advisory, United Kingdom. Whew, Dominic, that is a major mouthful. Dominic, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Jasmine. And I'm glad that I don't need to say that regularly, or dare I say ever, because broadly speaking, I think when I sent it to you was probably the first time I'd ever written it down anywhere. And as I like to joke, I think that often the longer the title, the less senior it is, because it ends up being rather like the word quite, a qualifier rather than an amplifier in terms of scope and scale. But thank you for inviting me, Jasmine.
It's such a pleasure. Dominic is being very self-deprecating. He is a fabulous guru in the field of marketing. And in fact, he was a client of mine many years ago. So we are both very long in the tooth and have tons of experience under our belts. And Dominic is also a frequent listener to the podcast, which is very, very kind of him. And I think we mentioned him a few episodes ago because extraordinarily, Dominic listened to all of our episodes whilst going up to the base camp of Mount Everest. Dominic, I don't know which is braver, you going up to the base camp of Everest or listening to our podcast on the way, but what was that like for you going up to the base camp of Everest?
Well, I actually managed to get to both base camps. A lot of people may not know that there's also a base camp on the Chinese side in Tibet. So I went first there, which is not much of an expedition or anything too brave. You more or less just drive up to it, and then the more sort of classic traditional trek on the Nepalese side. So I fit them both into the same journey. And one of the things is when you're trekking up the mountain, you have to sort of pace yourself so that you're adjusting to the altitude. And so we'll have sort of rather short days of climbing involved and then days of acclimatization, which did mean that, yes, on the route, I had plenty of time to be sitting in the tea houses and listening to podcasts.
Well, I'm so enchanted by the vision of you sitting in a tea house in Nepal with, the abominable snowman somewhere outside and listening to us nattering on. It's very funny. Dominic apparently listened to us on, I think it was 1.5 speed, right? So
Yeah.
You sped us up, which means that it'll be very boring for you to have to listen to me talk in normal time today, Dominic. Just out of interest, I'm sure people will be fascinated by your Everest trip. That's not really the thing we're going to talk to you about, which is more marketing. But I just have to ask you a couple more questions. What prompted you to want to go up Everest?
As cliched as they might say, because it is there.
Mm-hmm.
No, I mean, I do enjoy going to interesting places on my holidays and getting a bit more of an expedition, shall we say, than just going to relax on the beach. So originally it was the idea was to visit Tibet, and given that had reopened recently, it was so we could get in. I was like, yeah, I'll go there, and then I just sort of figured, well, being as how I'm in the area, I may as well just do the trek up to Everest Base Camp as well while I'm at it. Which, yeah.
Good heavens. Well, I think that very much shows the kind of personality that Dominic is, that on a whim, he decides to go up to the base camp of Everest. The subject that we've brought you on to talk about today is less mountaineering and more how one climbs the mountain of marketing for professional services. So I think that's just a really, really interesting subject. And by professional services, I guess, just to be clear, we mean things like law firms, accounting, private equity. So, Dominic being at Deloitte, these are not products that you can taste or smell or try on in store, right? You don't take them home in a smart shopping bag or unwrap them from sexy packaging. Not that the Deloitte people aren't beautifully packaged in their own way, but these are services, they're invisible, they're ineffable products delivered entirely through sort of human service, right? So it must be really hard to have consistency and to create a brand that promises a certain level of service. So I'm just really interested to know, Dominic, how you do the marketing for the private equity wing of Deloitte. How do you think one markets something as intangible as a professional services company?
So I think if I sort of, again, step back and look at this, it's important to understand the nature of professional service firms. And as you said, they are about the people. So it's a cliche to say it's all about the people. However, there's a reason why it's a cliche, which is because it's true. And I think especially so in professional services.
Here's my question though, is, I do think that every time I ask any professional services firm what sort of makes the magic of their brand, they say the people. But the thing is, they all say the people. So if I went into PwC and asked them what made them great, they would say the people. And if I went into Ernst & Young and asked them, they would say the people, and KPMG would say the people. And I don't feel like that can be differentiating for everybody, but B, sometimes the people swap around. I mean, sometimes you guys leave. I mean, you've been at Deloitte for a million years, but some people leave and go to one of the other companies. So how can it really be the people?
So I think it is, and obviously we have a brand, and in one of my previous roles within Deloitte, I was in the global brand team. So that was when we worked together in that context, looking at the global brand, the branding, and those kinds of things. And I think that there is always a sort of it's a two-way relationship between, it's got to be bottom up as well as top down. I'll sometimes look at the brand as, say, more like an umbrella. It sort of gives the cover, it gives the brand space and permission in which to operate, but it is going to be built on the unique, specific expertise within the teams. And I think that when you then start talking about the people, it's not a monolithic organization. Across the business, there are so many different businesses that all sort of fit under this umbrella of Deloitte, in my case, or PwC, EY, whatever. But each of them will operate in their own ways that are relevant to their expertise, to their skill sets, and to their clients. And dare I say it, to the individual people as well. So you can have, and that's one of the things that I found with my career at Deloitte, is you can almost move to totally brand new roles and discover totally brand new things that you'd never heard of before, which are just happening a few rows away in a different team on the desk.
Right. It's very enriching and keeps you there for a long time, sure.
Well, absolutely, but it's still challenging and still sort of giving that scope to sort of learn new things in within that same the same organization. But I think the broader piece there is that the brand relies on the expertise that the individuals have built up, and it can't exist without that. So it's not like a consumer goods product where you can just sort of put a logo on it and say this is that, and that then sort of imbues it with the with the characteristics of the brand. It is the kind of thing where it will be the brand is much more dynamic and organic in terms of working with the business. The people are shaping it. And as the business evolves, the brand evolves with it.
I think something that's fascinating about professional services marketing is that in some sense, what you're marketing is relationships. So, I mean, I'm interested, like, how does one market relationships?
The relationships are still held between the partners and the client, and in many ways, one of the things that they always say for marketing is it's the voice of the client to the business. In a professional service context, that's not always the case, because marketing is behind the partners, behind the business in terms of the client relationship. So it's very much about helping the business to be the best that they can in those client relationships. And I think there's, again, this is where it becomes very much down to the individuals and who you're working with and what their skills are. So it will be about the kinds of things that perhaps is about bringing in some of the more advertising end of the campaigns and that kind of stuff to give some structure and content to what they are able to bring into those into their client relationships. It is very often about building the knowledge and understanding across the base, where somebody can be a really expert practitioner in one area, but in as much as I didn't know what was going on with another team, they also don't know what's going on with another team. So helping to sort of bridge those things and doing, in some ways, that internal communications and internal marketing to bring people together and sort of say, this is how we can bring the various realms of expertise that you've got together in order to deliver something that is better for your clients.
So just to be
So
clear, just to bring that
yeah.
to life for our listeners, you might have different teams working with the same business. So you might be doing, I don't know, tax advisory for somebody and strategic advice for somebody else, and so, but for the same client, right? So I mean, I think it's really interesting that what you talked about is kind of, it's almost like the internal partners are actually more your target market than the customers in this professional services context, right?
I mean, I think there's both of those there, but yes, we are working with the partners and the internal audience to get to the client, as
Yeah.
opposed to sort of bypassing them and going direct to the client in most cases. And as you say, I mean, yes, you could very often have multiple teams working with the same client, but again, remember that the client's not going to be monolithic either. So
No.
if you're delivering tax advice to a client, you'll be working with a tax department. If you're doing if you're simultaneously delivering an IT program with them, you might be working with the IT director. So you're not necessarily going to be working with the same parts of the client. So a lot of this is about how do we build those relationships and and gain that better understanding of what the others are doing and how that can improve the outcomes for the client as much as for the firm.
And how do you go about measuring in any way the effectiveness of what you're doing? Because it sounds very much like you're sort of working with relationships with humans. You're creating this kind of bridge. It's about communication. It's about bringing people together. Like, how do you, in any way, I mean, measuring effectiveness is hard for anybody in any marketing, but how do you demonstrate that worth?
I mean, what's the cliche about advertising, that half my advertising budget is wasted? The trouble is, I don't know which half. So I think that is that's one of your challenges, which is how do you demonstrate that? And I think it is about looking at, especially with client relationships, how are we helping to drive those relationships? How are we helping to give the structure that, because for all the best will in the world, and in many ways, I could say that you yourselves are a professional services firm. In terms of what you are delivering is the brand and marketing expertise, and you are each doing that. And so in a similar sort of a way, as you move on from one client project to the next, how do you ensure that those relationships are kept live and kept current, and that you continue to be front of mind with your clients? And that is where
By doing a podcast, Dominic, by doing a
there
podcast.
you go, there you go, there you go, exactly.
But
And
no, I mean,
and
it's
and
a really tough question. And we
and
do it really
this
badly, generally. We're a case of physician heal thyself. We are terrible at marketing ourselves. We're really good at marketing everybody else's stuff. We are hopeless at marketing our agencies, and it's an irony.
well, and I mean, I think that there is. I think it's easy to be self-critical and sort of say these are all the things that we all do wrong. I think there is also just the point that there's always more that we could be doing, and we can
Indeed.
always look at it and sort of say, well, yes, I would like to improve this, and those kinds of things. But that is where I think, yeah, as you're saying, podcasts, thought leadership is one of the things, that is one of the ways that we can use. And why that's especially valuable within professional services, I'd say, is because it achieves a number of things. One, it is demonstrating the technical expertise. So what you're doing is you're doing something that is relevant. You're demonstrating that expertise.
Can you just describe for people who don't know what we mean by thought leadership, what that means exactly?
Thought leadership, it covers a broad range of content that is produced. Typically, what it has in common there is that it is something that is producing either research-based or content that is thinking about the shape of what business is going to be relevant to your expertise. So that could be either, sometimes that might be, for example, looking at market trends. So some of our best well-known reports is we have, for example, a crane survey, which is looking at the state of real estate across London. And so it is using the number of cranes
to see how many cranes.
Yes.
No way. Seriously.
That was how it originated, and it has gone from there.
Just for people who don't know London so well, if you look across the skyline of London, there was 1 million cranes because something is always being built. And I always ask the question, when will London be finished? So you guys literally, you count the cranes to show the state of real estate and how well it's doing.
That is one of the metrics involved in it. Is the number of cranes, and yes, I mean, just looking out my window right now, I can probably count about 25 cranes. But yes, because what that is demonstrating is the construction that is going on.
And we all know that when we Google search something, so often a report will come up from somebody wonderful like Deloitte saying, hey, we've got research on this, and we all quote them in our presentation. So God bless you for doing that. Okay, so that's thought leadership. And you were starting to say, and I rudely interrupted you, why that's important and sort of how you use it.
One of the things that professional service firms have traditionally done for our clients, and I would say this is specifically audit and or audit and accounting more broadly, and law firms, is because our people have the technical expertise to actually study the accounting regulations, to study the law and those kinds of things, that it has traditionally been considered a sort of a part of our social responsibility, in effect, to help practitioners within our client base to understand those laws and regulations.
How much do you guys, or how much do professional services firms generally, do you think, do kind of cold lead generation campaigns? Like, you've talked a lot about the sort of farming of existing clients, existing relationships, thought leadership, but how much do you think professional services firms kind of just go out cold and look for people?
I think it depends on the individual organization's context and those kinds of things. What you will very often find, I think, is that the client base for a given service tends to be a very defined set. So if you are talking, I mean, maybe if you take sort of, let's say, okay, one end of the legal spectrum, you might have, say, divorce lawyers. That's basically anywhere, and so that's a very broad marketing context. Whereas at the other end, if you're doing legal advice on complex M&A transactions, well, actually, your audience is going to be very limited, and it is somewhat of a community of people as to who that market is going to be. And people will tend to move from one organization to another. So there tends to be less of that kind of picking up the phone to someone and going, would you like our services? That's not really the way that we would do things in the way that other businesses might.
Right.
And so it's generally working on, coming back to it, the people in the relationships. It's the people in the relationships who we're talking about, the relationships that may already exist within the firm or through our networks. And it's leveraging that rather than trying to say, I'm going to go and say cold approach to XYZ company.
Okay. How important is the role of branding for professional services? How is it different? I mean, it's very different from product brands. I think it must be so hard because if you're working for, Toilet Duck, right? All you have to do is promise the same experience from Toilet Duck. Sorry if any of you know what that is. It's a toilet cleaning brand. I don't know why I picked that. But all you have to do is promise that it's going to clean your toilets in the same way all the time. But it's dead easy. Just as long as you retain, I don't know, better example, Persil, it's always, Omo detergent, it's always going to make your whites whiter than white. It's dead easy. Just live up to that promise on a regular basis and you've got a brand. Do you ever wish that you worked for something a little more tangible, that was a little easier to market and brand? And is branding important?
you can always see the pros and cons of other things. In some ways, what I love about working with professional services is that you do have to be a bit more creative and think a bit more broadly about it. In terms of, is brand important? Yes, it is important, but not necessarily in the same way as with a product brand, for exactly the reasons that you've said. You can't just sort of stick a label on it and say this is that. It is that much more two-way street between the people and the processes and all of that, and how they interact with it, how they deliver their services, and maintain and manage the client relationships. So in that sense, very often, brand can become much more immersed throughout the business in terms of how it needs to be embedded into recruitment, into performance metrics, into compliance, you know, ensuring that the right standards are met. And so you start to get the brand is not just the logo, it is there's a lot more to it that all sort of underpin and build up to the brand.
I think that's very interesting what you said about recruitment. I mean, I think so often with services, professional services firms, part of it is like, it's a yardstick, isn't it, by which you measure people coming in, and also kind of a promise of a certain type of career, a certain type of corporate culture, a certain type of person that you're looking for. It's kind of a beacon. Do you feel that? And how important is the brand internally and in terms of recruitment? How do you use it in those ways?
Sometimes I think, especially let's say with Deloitte and the Big Four, is that you have the category brand, which can often be greater than the sum of its parts. I guess an example might be, say, something like a Savile Row suit. If you're going to say a Savile Row suit, you're not necessarily thinking about which specific tailor on Savile Row, but that defines the category. And so I think sometimes you can have that. We've got that, let's say, Big Four. No disrespect to the others who aren't in the Big Four, but you know that is both a matter of scale and you know and breadth. Or you've got, say, the magic circle in legal terms. You've got that where I think sometimes you can have that. So it's not necessarily that you're expecting Deloitte, PwC, EY, KPMG to be so massively different from each other, but we will each have our own specific expertise and reputations and identities within that, but there is still the broader category of the Big Four.
That is such an interesting point, and I think that's something really fascinating that people often don't think about. You know, I always say that brands are not single-celled organisms, they're kind of molecules that exist with other brands, if you like. And, you know, if you're Coca-Cola, you're also attached to Diet Coke and to Dasani and to other things, and Sprite and other things that are happening in the ecosystem of Coca-Cola. And I think that the Big Four is a brand. It's an even more invisible, intangible brand in its own way, because it's not official. It doesn't have a logo, as far as I know. Nobody's actively managing it, and yet you're all contributing to it, and you're all leveraging off of it. You're all wearing that halo effect. And I think the Magic Circle, fascinating examples of almost kind of invisible but powerful forces in the branding world. Super interesting. I think also you talked when we were chatting the other day in preparation for this interview about something that I thought was really interesting, which was about brand stretch, and the idea that your brand essentially gives you permission to play. And I think if you look at a lot of brands have very limited brand stretch. So, you know, you couldn't imagine, I suppose, I don't know, maybe you could, but, you know, could one imagine a Toyota hotel or a Visa airplane? Like, maybe not. And yet we can imagine Armani hotel, and Virgin can do, you know, Virgin Music, it can do Virgin Atlantic, it can do Virgin Weddings, it can do Virgin Trains, albeit really badly, but Branson can pretty much do anything. How do you know how much brand stretch you have as a brand, and what areas you have permission to play? Could we see a Deloitte hotel? How do you know? I don't know if I would say that. I would trust Deloitte with many things, but, you know, a 5-star experience. Well, no, actually, you do deliver a 5-star experience. How much stretch do you have, and how do you know how much stretch you have?
I think the only way that you know really is by stretching it and sort of experimenting in different spaces. So I think, you know, part of it is that piece of, we're not going to suddenly jump from Deloitte accounting to Deloitte hotels. You know, that is a massive jump. However, potentially there are some incremental stretches that would bring it there, or or things like that. Now, I mean, far be it from me to suggest the corporate strategy for Deloitte, but I don't think hotels is where we're going.
So
I,
you
I,
dip, you dip your toe in the water and you see if that makes sense.
I think yeah, there's an element of dipping your toe, maybe trying various things. Very often that can be where, say, partnerships or mergers will happen. So we may work with other providers, say from an AI perspective. We would work with other providers who are the AI experts, and we are bringing the Deloitte element to that. And then again, over time, we work with them to then deliver something that is greater than the sum of its parts.
I'm very interested in kind of the way that decisions around branding and marketing are made in professional services companies, because my experience, I've worked with a lot of law firms in the past, and they're an absolute nightmare to get any decisions made. So they're a joy to work with because it's incredibly smart people. And I think somewhere like Deloitte is such a joy to work with because everyone in that organization is super smart. The trouble with the partnership model is, like, when we're doing it from a branding perspective, is we go in and we say, right, here are some 4 options for what your brand could stand for in the future. Now let's make a decision. And in an organization like Pepsi, or, I don't know, like a CEO will consult everybody, and then he or she will make a decision. But when it's a partner-run organization, the partners can debate it for about 20 years and nobody will actually put their foot down. So I'm interested in, like, do you find that, I mean, you've worked there for so long, maybe you're not aware of some of the more the peculiarities of the decision making, but do you think that in a broad sense, how decisions are made around branding and marketing in professional services companies differs from more top-down or command and control companies, and how do you work with that?
Yeah, so I think you've described the contrast there quite well, in terms of there's a difference between a top-down structure and professional service firms, which are much more organic in nature. One of my professors, Laura Empson, has coined the term a leadership constellation as opposed to a leadership hierarchy. Yes, you may not get that sort of immediate, yes, let's go and do this and do a whole big radical change. But instead, it moves more organically and at a slower pace. But that can also provide a very strong element of stability and of continuity within the organization, because the organization is sort of building on that sort of collective knowledge and experience of the partnership and the employees to propel it forward. And so it's unlikely to make a massive radical change, but it will evolve over time in a more organic way to adapt to what's needed in the marketplace.
Do you feel like you as an individual need this particular set of skills to help get things done?
I think I'm not sure if it's a specific set of skills in a Liam Neeson kind of a context. I think adaptability is very important. And if I sort of say, well, actually, what do I do as I come at it? Well, I think I didn't come from a specific marketing context. I didn't sort of do a marketing degree and come into it as a marketer. I sort of came into it and applied the skills that I had, and looking at it much more organically in that sense, in terms of sort of saying, this is something that needs doing, how do I achieve that? And so when I was more junior in my role, sort of building up through the ranks there, I was learning from the various people who had their specific expertise and sort of bringing them together as sort of, let's say, a tool set to apply as and where needed.
I'm sure people are hoping I'm going to ask you what you actually did study. What did you do your degree in?
I didn't do a degree. I'd grown up as an expat, and I think I can say this without revealing too much, that when we compared notes, I think we discovered that we had both been in Dhaka, Bangladesh at the same time when we were a few years younger.
Absolutely. I was 11 in Dhaka, and you were a little bit younger than me.
I was a few years younger than that. Yeah. But so we're in different schools in that, but it was
Yeah.
we must have been around the corner from each other and just never interacted.
Totally. It's so funny. I lived in Banani in Dhaka. Where did you live?
I
Gulshan?
can't remember. Yeah, it was Gulshan, I think. It was Gulshan. Yeah, it was
We're
Gulshan.
both UN brats who moved around all the time. So you had this expat peripatetic existence, and then you didn't do a degree?
No, so I came back to the UK, started with some friends who were starting a business, and then came into London and started out as a temp and then worked my way up through various roles, having done a range of different things. Although I have been at Deloitte for a long time, I had previously done stints at both 𝐒𝐿𝐲 and KPMG. So more recently, I did an MBA. So I've done the MBA after having worked for a few years.
So enjoyed chatting to you about Deloitte, about professional services, and about your background. Thank you so much for coming on. What is your next mountain that you're climbing? Any plans for I don't know, have you done 𝐭𝐚𝐲?
I'm currently toying with Easter Island, but let's see.
Well, if you get signal on Easter Island, I hope that you will continue to be a loyal listener to this podcast. And I'm delighted that we could accompany you up Everest. And I'm so delighted that you've accompanied us today in this chat. It's been so interesting. Thanks for being a part of it. And everybody else, thank you for listening. This has been Marketing a Global Edition with me, Jasmine Montgomery, and with Dominic Graham from Deloitte. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Marketing Global Edition is sponsored by 𝐒𝐨𝐧𝐧𝐷, the ad generator for small businesses that serves you effective and affordable ads in seconds. And by 7 Brands, the international advertising and branding agency that has worked with clients around the world from Coca-Cola to Facebook.